Good evening. I'm Bruce Garfield, and I'm the Executive Director of Your Music Commission. Welcome to the 9th consecutive Music Business Monday Forum. When we conceived these Music Business Mondays, we had three goals in mind. The first one was to provide the opportunity for our entire music community to come together under one roof. I guess tonight it's under one URL. The second was to be able to attract the music industry's most creative, intelligent, and brightest functionaries from every single discipline of the business to come to Columbus and impart information on a myriad of subjects to our community, as well as to engage in a robust question and answer period, and also actually mingle with the audience and answer their questions individually after the forum was over. And lastly, we wanted to expose these visiting executives, the majority of whom have never been to Columbus, to experience Columbus, to get a feel for our pulse and see what our vibrant, growing music ecosystem was all about. They all left basically uttering the same four words, which were, I had no idea. Well, I think they do now, and that's something we should all be proud of. You know, tonight we're going to tell a story it's a 100% Columbus story. It probably exemplifies what we call the Columbus way. It's a story about a band who's become so synonymous with Columbus, it parallels what Bruce Springsteen has become to New Jersey, or the Eagles have become to Southern California. And navigating for us this evening and moderating is the first chairman of the Music Commission, current board member, bluegrass musician, positive community activist, and sometimes the CEO of Donato's Pizza. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Tom Kraus.
Thank you. I think I hear wild applause. Maybe not. Listen, I am so excited about being able to moderate this esteemed group. We've got some incredible professionals who are going to be able to tell the whole story about 21 Pilots and hopefully give you a sense for what are some of the aspects and some of the thoughts that they had to go through and how they work together as an organization to achieve what they're trying to achieve. I'm going to introduce our panelists here in a minute, but at first I just want to mention that I'm going to be asking a lot of questions and we're going to get some good dialogue and conversation going. I also want you to be able to ask your own questions so that we get to a certain point in the evening and we'll switch over to the questions that you all have for our panel. And you'll do that by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom and typing in your questions, and we'll start to collect them all. And we're going to have a great hour or so. So let's get started. First, let's talk a little bit about the band. So 21 Pilots officially formed in 2009. The members of the band were Tyler Joseph, Chris Siley, and Nick Thomas. Nick was a childhood friend of Tyler's, and Chris and the three of them went to school together here at Ohio State. They recorded their first album down in the basement of a house that they all lived in. They played bars and clubs all around Columbus. As they continued to play, they added certain elements of their performance, like costumes and theatrics and backflips and things like that. They really started to generate some energy and some buzz. They began touring Ohio. They entered a number of Battle of the Bands at places like the Basement or the Alrosa Villa. And in 2011, Thomas Siley left the band and Josh Dunn joined the band. Josh was friends with Siley. In fact, they worked at Guitar Center together here in Columbus. By the way, Josh also made pizzas at Donato's when he was 15. So that's a key ingredient to success there, I think. They released their second album, Regional at Best, in July of 2011. In November of the same year, after they did a whole ton of social media promotion and touring. They played what turned out to be probably the big turning point in their career as they were here in Columbus. And that was a sold out show at the Newport Music Hall, which ended up really getting a lot of attention from labels. And in 2012, they signed with Fueled by Ramen, which is a subsidiary of Atlantic Records. And we're going to hear from Pete from Atlantic here in a little bit. Their third album, Vessel, released in 2013, Holding On to You, reached the number 11 on the Billboard Alt Songs chart. And then that summer, they toured with Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco. Periodically, between tours and album releases, they were always releasing videos and singles. And then Blurry Face was released in 2015. That album had the hit song Stressed Out, which won a Grammy for the best pop duo performance. Many of you remember their acceptance speech as their pants were down around their ankles on stage at the Grammys. 2018, they released Trench and began their Bandito tour. And today, they're home and they're in a creative mode. And we are really lucky to have three individuals who are a key part of the team. And I'm going to introduce them one by one. First, I want to call up Chris Walton. So Chris is the owner of Element One, which is a music marketing management company. Interestingly, Chris booked bands in college at Promo West here in Columbus. So Chris is a Buckeye, worked for Sony Music, Columbia Records, RCA, has working with bands like Maroon 5, Train, Alice in Chains. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be back home. I wish I was there, and looking forward to our conversation today, and really love what you guys are doing and how you're trying to bring all of this conversation to the music scene in Columbus and really make a mark on the Columbus market when it comes to what's happening musically. So looking forward to this and all that comes out of it.
Good. I'm glad you could be here. We're really interested to hear from you. So second gentleman I want to introduce is a gentleman named Brad Gibson. Brad is with Sound Capital Management. He's down in Nashville right now, I think. Chris, you're out in California, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in San Diego.
Okay, and there's Brad. Hi, Brad.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Brad.
I'm going to let Brad do, when we get a little bit later, I'm going to ask some questions, let him do a little bit more of his story, because he has a very interesting story. His relationship with the band, a lot of his career prior to music had little to do with music, was in finance, marketing, etc. But he owns Sound Capital Management and handles all the business dealings. Brad, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. And I echo what Chris said. I mean, I think this is a great opportunity to share the story, the Columbus story of 21 Pilots. And yeah, I'll have some other interesting coincidental facts that even brought Chris and I together, which is really, really kind of amazing. So
Good thing we didn't rehearse this, because I'm going to learn a lot today. And then finally, I want to bring up Pete Ganbare. Pete is the president of A&R at Atlantic Records. He has a long career at SBK, Arista, Epic, his own company, Pure Tone Music. Worked with many people like Michael Jackson, Celine Dion, Run DMC, just a few small acts like that. Was also a big part of his career was working with Santana, and their Grammy-winning Supernatural Album of the Year was a big part of Pete's career. Pete, welcome.
Thanks. Very happy to join you guys. Love Columbus. For the last many years has been one of my homes away from home. So very happy to be here, and friends with Bruce Garfield forever. So always happy to help my friend Bruce.
We appreciate that. Bruce has brought a lot to Columbus. Not only his passion and desire and energy, he's nonstop, but he has a lot of great friends like yourself and all of you on this panel that we can help bring some insight. So as we have a little discussion here, just be thinking about the audience. We have a lot of musicians, a lot of music makers, we have business leaders, et cetera, in the audience, and anything that you can be thinking about that'll help them with their career. This isn't the how to get rich quick presentation. This is more a story of 21 Pilots, which is unique to 21 Pilots. So let's just go around the room and first maybe just go back, introduce yourself a little bit, maybe talk a little bit about how you came to be working with 21 Pilots and maybe how long you've been working with 21 Pilots. Let's start with Brad. Brad, you want to give us a little bit of history of your background with the band?
Yeah. So again, I'm Brad Gibson. I was born and raised in Columbus, and went to Arlington High School with one Tom Kraus. I went to The Ohio State University as well. So my background is all Columbus. When I was in high school, I met and became quick friends with a guy named Chris Joseph. And Chris and I were same age and soon to be married and having kids, but we just stayed good friends all along. And so we kind of, from high school and college on up, we're best friends and hung out together and raised our kids together and took vacations and did holidays and all that. And that's kind of how my relationship with the Josephs started that many years ago. I don't want to say how many, it's too many, but so Chris and I, have always been really good friends and on different tracks. But my background, as you mentioned, was in investments and finance, and I was in that business for 30 some years. But I remember one day, because our kids were friends, that my kids and Chris's kids, and that included their oldest, Tyler. And Tyler came up to me one day, and I had spent, hours at their house and going to his basketball games with the rest of his family. And but one day Tyler came up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Gibson," that's when he used to call me Mr. Gibson. Hey, I started a band and wrote some songs, and I'd love for you to listen to them. And he gave me a CD. And I thought, well, that's interesting because he's a basketball player. He's not a musician. So I remember we had a long drive to Florida over spring break, and I popped that CD in, and I couldn't believe what I was listening to. I thought, this is actually really good, and not only really good, but really something special. And maybe I was just overwhelmed with the fact that it was Tyler.
How old was he at the time?
Tyler was, at that time, I think he was about 18.
So, was that all of his music? Did he create everything on there?
Yeah, he had created everything on there. And, and his early stuff was, I didn't know this. Now, I didn't know this then, but I know it now, that he was sharing a lot of that early music with my kids. And my youngest daughter, Amy, actually listened. She knows every word of every song of Tyler's that not everybody's ever heard. She can go back to some of his early CDs but so she had heard all this, and I was just kind of coming into it thinking, wow, this is actually really good. And so then it wasn't much longer after that. He said, "Hey, we've got a show tonight down at the what's that? There's, I think, the Scarlet and Gray Cafe on Ohio State's campus."
Yep.
And I was like, I'm there. And so I showed up, and I want to say there was about 9 people there, including the bartender and about 4 regulars. And what I noticed, and Chris and I have talked about this, from the very beginning, but what I noticed in that performance is that Tyler was performing as if he was in front of 10,000 people. I mean, he was oblivious to the fact that a lot of young, insecure, immature artists might find themselves in that environment and be discouraged, and they're not really here to see me. It didn't matter to him. He had a message, he had music to share, and he did it. And I just was blown away by his capacity, his ability. And it was right around the corner from a BW3s. And I said, "Okay, guys," they were done with the show. I said, "Follow me, I'm going to buy you dinner, and let's talk about this band thing." So that really was the beginning of me being involved. And I was like, and that was when it was Chris and Nick and Tyler. And from there, I just said, if you want, I'd love to help. How can I be helpful to you guys? And it just started with, we'd have little marketing meetings at the house they rented. We talk about, how can we find a way to play a show outside of Columbus? Remember, we booked our first show in Cleveland, and I thought we had, that was it. We'd hit the big time. But I mean, it was just a gradual step by step where, Tyler Tyler really had the whole thing kind of in his head, what he wanted to do, and methodically just followed those steps. And
I want to ask you more about that.
it just grew. Yeah, it was fascinating.
Were you then, did you just change your career at that point?
No.
No?
My one business partner was like, "You were where Saturday night?" And I said, "I was in Dayton at a little club, and Tyler's band was playing, and I went with them to." And I bought him breakfast afterwards or whatever. It's like just really crazy late nights. I wasn't doing a lot of things that that my business partner said it was kind of my midlife crisis. But
Yeah. They
this
don't
was,
expect the golden Buckeye card at
that's right, 10 or 12 years ago, and it was just fascinating to me to see what I could do, and to just be able to have a seat to watch this happen.
Right.
Was just thrilling for me.
Wow. You definitely knew something magical was happening, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Chris, how did you become a part of this merry band of minstrels here?
This was a random email from Brad, which Brad, you can probably tell the story better than I can. But I had my background, obviously born and raised in Columbus, and worked for Scott Steinecker when I was in college, and went to work at Sony Music. Pete and I met actually when we both worked at SBK in Pete, like 1990. We were 6 months old or something like that, and working at SBK Records, and then I went to work at Columbia Records, and kind of lived in this lane on the label side for about 13 years. And then I started my own thing. And as Brad was moving through his process and, giving the guys the support that he was giving them in the very, very early days, Brad, you probably tell it better than I do, but I think Brad realized, that this thing actually really is bigger than Columbus, Ohio, or the 9 people at the Scarlet and Gray Club, or the one-off show at a little venue in Dayton. And at that point, I'd started my management company. I left the label side of things. So this is 10 years ago, actually, Brad, 10 years ago this year, right? And I got a random email from Brad, and that began our journey together in the fall of 2011. I guess that.
But did you know each other through booking Tyler and the guys? No. How did you end up?
No. So what I can share that what happened is one of the shows or opportunities we had was to go play a small festival down in Kentucky or Tennessee or something. And we happened to see 2 bands play because when you go to do a festival, and we had like 4 different spots, I think, you see a bunch of different artists and bands. And there were 2 bands that I was really impressed with. But you have to understand, I did have my day job, but almost every night, every weekend, I'm pouring through the music industry, whatever I can find online, because I know we need a band. I know that this is way beyond what I can do, and I've got to help these guys find somebody to be their manager, because they deserve that. They need that. But these 2 bands I was impressed with. The next day I got home and I thought, well, I wonder who manages those bands. Like maybe I'll come up. And I found out it was the same guy. And then I found out this guy went to Ohio State. And then I find out he went to Northland High School. And I thought, okay, I'm going to email him because he has to listen to me now. I mean, he has to give me at least a response. I had been emailing every manager of every major band you can think of. And of course, I was getting 0 response. Nobody was answering my emails. But it was I'll never forget, it was a Friday night, and I shot an email to Chris, and within 20 minutes, I got a very nice email back. And I was like, wow, like he's really, at least he's a human being, I can maybe have a conversation with him. And it was phenomenal. It was like, I was going to say was, the thing that was so amazing is when it was all said and done, Chris said, hey, I'm going to come visit my parents. They live in Columbus. I'll come and we can meet and just go through some things. I was like, great, let's meet at Starbucks. It's down the street. At the time I lived in Powell. And Chris goes, well, my parents live in Powell. I said, you're kidding. Anyway, we come to find out his parents literally lived about a 2-minute walk from my house. We were in the same area. We sat down, and again, Chris, I'll let Chris share. But I think he and I just clicked right away. We knew right away that that was destiny. Like that, there was a purpose behind that, and we clicked. And I just knew that he needed to be the guy to lead this band. And it was just amazing how it all kind of came together.
Yeah.
So, Pete, what high school in Columbus did you go to?
That's right.
Well, there always has to be somebody who's not geographically related to everybody else. That would be me.
The expert's always from out of town.
How did you come about? Did Chris reach out to you, or how did you end up?
Actually, no. What happened was, I, as the head of A&R for Atlantic, I oversee not only the Atlantic A&R staff, but also our sub-labels as well, labels that are under the Atlantic umbrella. And at the time, back in 2011, we had a label called Photo Finish Records, which was run by a guy named Matt Galley, who's also a booking agent, a very successful booking agent. And Matt had signed the band 303 and had some success, and was always looking to find out who his next, to figure out who his next signing would be. And in order to get the signing approved, he would have to come to me and make sure that we were on the same page so we could get a deal done. So Matt is literally the first person who ever came to me and said the name 21 Pilots to me. Because Matt's a booking agent, he has relationships in the live world that traditional A&R people just don't have, because he's on the phone with agents all day, every day. So I'm not sure who it was, maybe Chris knows, but somebody had called Matt and told him that this band is the greatest live band they had ever seen, and that Matt had to get on a plane and come see 21 Pilots. Chris, do you remember who that was?
Yeah, it would have been AV out of
AV,
who works with Scott Steinecker.
Yeah.
So Matt went down, and again, I'm not sure the venue that Matt saw the band in. For some reason,
Would have been the Newport show in the fall of in November of 11, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he came back like a man possessed, like a religious fanatic. Like, I have seen it. This is amazing. Oh my goodness. We've got to sign this band. So at that point, I start talking to him, and then I get, I think I reached out to Chris, and as Chris said before, he and I have known each other since the early 90s, because we worked at the same record label right out of college together, a label called SBK Records. And I called Chris and, reintroduced myself, because we hadn't spoken or seen each other in a while. And Chris said to me within probably 20 seconds, "Hey, we're not going to sign a Photo Finish Records." And I said, "Okay." He's like, "But this band's really good. You should hear more about them. We're really, really excited." And so that conversation started, between me and Chris, trying to figure out if the band wasn't interested in Photo Finish, maybe there was another label inside the Atlantic group that they were interested in. And at that point, John Janik, who was the original founder and owner of Fueled by Ramen, who then Fueled by Ramen was bought by the Warner Music Group, and John brought Fueled by Ramen from outside into the Warner Group. He came to one of my A&R meetings, and we started talking about 21 Pilots, and he said, I'm interested in this band. And so then I called Chris and I said, "Well, John Janik is interested in the band potentially for Fueled by Ramen. Would you maybe want to come to New York and meet John and meet everyone at FBR and meet everyone at Atlantic and talk about, potential of 21 Pilots inside of the Atlantic group through Fueled by Ramen?" And I believe, Chris, you said that you were okay with that.
You said we're okay with that. Yeah. There was that window between that show in November of 11, Brad, right? And probably January, where, I think it was just the reality that something true and authentic was happening in Columbus, Ohio. One of those classic music industry tales of a band that was emerging, if not exploding out of their home market, probably is the best way to say it. Right. And the level of interest on the label side really just shot through the roof in the span of about probably I don't know, probably 60 days, I think, in that window, through the end of 11 into early January of 2012. And Brad and Tyler and Josh and I began the quest to find a partner, right, Pete? I think that's probably the best way to say it. And it was a series of meetings, many meetings over that window, in that window of time. And, I think, you look at fundamentally what 21 Pilots is about, these, the songs and the vision. And as I quickly realized, the professionalism and the work ethic and the dedication to the art of the vision, it became this amazing journey to go and walk in and sit with, the leadership of, I think, Pete. There were at one point, I think we had 13 labels that were in the mix, and and we walked in with a vision, right? And Tyler and Josh articulating that vision and what it meant creatively. Brad and I walking through what was happening with the vision of the business and the strategy, and we narrowed it down to 3, and then ultimately narrowed it down to 1, and that was Food by Ramen. And Pete, look, I don't, you should hear this in a public forum. You were probably one of the key, maybe the key ingredient that had this fall in the position of FBR that it did, because from our end, we knew that you were there, and that there was going to be some guidance on your end as we were getting into the early days at Atlantic Fuel by Ramen. So it was a pretty amazing moment in time.
Let me ask you a question, and maybe I'll start with Chris. How we were talking a little bit about, I hear themes of trust here, and I'm trying to separate and see what's distinct about some elements of what has fueled this band. And I know, an artist's value is really rooted in kind of their personality and their values, how they approach. And you even said the way they articulate themselves. What is it about Tyler and Josh, and but Tyler specifically, that has I think created value beyond just the sound and just the, what is that kind of intangible?
Yeah, Tom, it's a great question. I'm not sure I can put it into words. It's this magic of what it is. Early on, it was somebody, as Brad mentioned, whether it was 9 people or 2 people or 1,000 people, that Tyler played with as much conviction, and Tyler and Josh performed with as much conviction as though they were playing for many, many more. And there's magic in that. I think there's magic in, you look at one's ability to write songs and what those songs mean and how they define what a vision is. And, Brad and Pete have heard me say many times, I think that Tyler is one of the greatest songwriters of his generation. And he has a message, and he has an emotion that connects with people all around the world. And all those things were abundantly clear. I mean, Brad, I think, you saw it when you popped that, Tyler says to you, like, what do you mean? You play basketball. You're not in a band. And you all of a sudden on a 16, 17 hour drive to Florida for spring break. And you're probably just hitting repeat on songs nonstop. And the magic of that, Tom, I mean, I think that is, that right there is at its core the most important part of this story. But then, right behind that is this idea of what I mentioned a minute ago, this idea of work ethic. The idea that I have to get up every morning and I have to work at my craft. Right. I have to get up every morning and I have to understand and try to learn more about this business that I'm entering into. And I have to learn to accept and trust and surround myself with people that, that I do trust. And I think that probably is the definitive takeaway of what the early days, you could feel it. Hindsight now being what it is, what was felt in those early days has played out and has been, I think fundamental to why we're sitting here right now.
You talk about that passion and that work ethic, and you look at Columbus, and Columbus is filled with a lot of musicians who have a level of passion and work ethic that drives them. And I'm curious a little bit, maybe just to talk about Columbus a little bit. What is it about this community that you think may have been helpful or instrumental in their success? And then therefore, what are those characteristics that we need to embrace to help artists? Because the Music Commission is here not for anything else but to help music makers elevate their craft or elevate their business or create a career. So maybe I'll start with you, Brad. How would you discuss Columbus's role?
I mean, I think you're right. Columbus has that impression from maybe the rest of the country that is not familiar with the city as being just kind of maybe a small town, irrelevant type city. Well, those of us who lived there and grew up there know that that's just not the case. And there's major business, major commerce going on. Ohio State's one of the premier universities. There's so much going on, white collar, blue collar. It's a very vibrant community. What I think's interesting, and I think that it speaks directly to 21 Pilots, is Tyler and Josh had never wanted to get away from Columbus. Like that, it's in their blood. It's their families are there. It's a work ethic. It's a life ethic that I think has kept them grounded. And honestly, Chris can speak to this much better than I can because of and Pete as well, because of their vast experience in the music industry. But when you look at guys like Tyler and Josh and bona fide rock stars around the world, we've been all over the world with them, and the crowds and the people go insane. They are two of the most fundamentally sound, kind, real people you'll ever know. And Tom, I mean, it's just
They're not throwing televisions out the window of the hotel.
It's just there's just something about their upbringing. Obviously their families have a ton to do with that, but the city itself has just been a place that there's no pretense, there's no I made it big, so now I'm leaving Columbus. It's just not.
How did the city help them? What is it about Columbus that helped them?
I don't know. Probably just the reinforcement. I mean, of the connections they had. Like Tyler's dad and his grandfather, they used to work at the Ohio State Fair every year, and Tyler would go and he would spend hours and hours at the Ohio State Fair because his family was involved. Ohio State football games, any kind of there was a lot of community involvement to speak of their early days, and I don't know. It's been pleasantly surprising. They just don't have a desire to get away from it.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on Columbus's role with the band?
No, I mean, Brad hits it on the head at its base level. That this is the idea of Columbus, Ohio runs through the totality of this team, but specifically through Tyler and Josh. I think that early on, specific to the business of the music side of things, Promo S was a tremendous partner, and I think you've got today, when you look at where Scott is with that company, you have the ability to grow your business from the 200 cap room at the basement, all the way ultimately into the arenas if you want to, into the stadium if you want to. But on the grounded level, moving through the complex at Promo West and in the Newport Music Hall, that there is a live music scene in Columbus that is there. It was there early on. I think that you look at that moment in November of 11 where that Newport Music Hall show was oversold by probably 200 or 300 people, Brad, I would imagine, based off what the capacity is. Yeah. And there's that. What it showed, probably at its core, at least through my lens, the most important piece of this puzzle was the music that Tyler was writing and how Tyler and Josh were putting that music on stage was something that was being discovered and being shared, you know. And 2011, I don't think we would have said it's going viral, but it was doing that. Discovery was rampant, and you know, and it wasn't. Not being critical of the moment that we live in right now, it wasn't a TikTok moment. This was about people going into the depth of that first album or those first 2 records in that early point, and finding the magic of the connection with those songs, whether that be the melody or whether that be a personal lyrical connection. But you know, that was at its core. That was what was happening in Columbus, Ohio, in the street.
Well, I was going to ask Pete a question along those lines. You know, how do you describe what it is about the sound, their music, their personality? What are some of the kind of elements that you see that is unique about them that connects with their fans differently than other bands? Is there something different that you would describe?
I think the word to most accurately describe the music that the guys make is authentic. And there's nobody else in the world who could make the same music that these guys make. And that's what got me excited about working with them in the very beginning, because it was really taking Tyler's vision and helping to expand it and to help, you know, take out a magnifying glass and give him the access to resources that he might not have had at home in Columbus to be able to go out do whatever he wanted to achieve creatively.
And is that what you look for in artists generally? Is authenticity one of the main things that you're looking for?
If you're looking for artists with long-term staying power and artists that are going to be around for a long time, you definitely want them to be the real deal. You want them, even if that means, like Brad said before, that they're playing a gig and 9 people are at the gig and 5 of them work there. If they believe it and those other few people who are there believe it, they're going to tell their friends. And the next time the band's going to come and work, you know, just as hard, if not harder, to really get everybody in the room to pay attention. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I remember the first time that I saw the band in Columbus, it was really amazing because right over city limits, you know, there was nothing going on, but there was this crazy story happening in Columbus. And we all decided, you know, huddling up and saying, you know, just market by market, venue by venue, town by town, fan by fan, we can do this all over the world. But we have to do it right, and we have to do it patient. We can't cut corners. And the most important thing is to make sure that we're always remembering, you know, what makes this band unique and what makes this band authentic, and not to do anything that takes anything away from that, because that's when you're going to start losing the fans.
Right.
And, you know, Pete, to tell a story, I'll never forget Pete calling me after you saw the guys in Pittsburgh, you know, and you talk about where it is today versus where it was, you know, Columbus having this, you know, this sold out moment at the Newport Music Hall. But in Pittsburgh, you know, 3 hours away, it was, Pete, 50, 60 people, I think is, you know, who came out for that first show in Pittsburgh. And, you know, today Pittsburgh is, you know, 15,000. But that was the point, right? That even in Columbus, Ohio, where it was 1,700, that the next day the guys in, you know, they're in Pittsburgh and they're playing for 50 people.
I think half of those 50 people drove from Columbus.
I think you said that to me when you called.
Well, let me ask you a question. The word professionalism has come up a few times, and I think you know, it begs the question: how involved? And I'm thinking about the people in the audience also. How involved is the band in the business of 21 Pilots? You know, there's the artistry, but there's deal terms, there's you know, rights, there's production, there's touring decisions. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made, and how involved are they? And also, how involved do you think artists should and need to be? Because you have to find a team that you trust. You already said that. But at the same time, are you driving the result because of that vision that you have? How involved are they? Anybody.
You want to take it, or you want me to take a
Oh,
shot?
Chris, yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Barry would be the answer. I think a part of this also, and purely from the business side, and not to speak for Brad, but Brad and I are on the same page on all things. That part of this is a responsibility on our end to also share what early on what this industry was about. And I think the thinking there, certainly on for me at that point, having come from 12 years climbing the corporate ladder on the label side. I felt and feel that, the idea of having a better understanding of that, while not trying to have the idea of the business or strategy or deal points or terms and all of these other things that, recoupables and advances and all the other things that come within the specific lane of this industry, not letting those things muddy the creative vision. But the truth is, this is their business, and ultimately we work for them. And within that, the dance that I believe has been perfected has been one where everyone knows the role that they play at this point, right? And early on, it was vitally important that I think on our end that the guys understand what this thing called the music business was all about. And I think that is served very well. The flip side of that is that there's a tremendous amount of trust, as you mentioned, Tom. There's a tremendous amount of trust in letting decisions be made from the people who sit in their respective seats. And I think that is the balance of the dance that ultimately has been an extreme positive to what this story is.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that a super important element of new emerging artists? Is how do you find the right people to associate yourself with? I mean, it's the stories you hear most are, the mistakes that were made, or I trusted this person and it wasn't the right. How do you help people who are trying to elevate their career make sure that they're working with the right people?
Yeah, it's funny. We never created checks and balances per se. I think, Brad, you would probably say that, but checks and balances created themselves, right? And I say that in the most positive of ways. That was, there is the level of communication. I mean, I look back on, we would do conference calls and walk in with agendas, and we ran it early on. It was run like a business. And, there is a de facto org chart within our little bubble of people that work within our world. And, we approached it that way because that is the way you have to approach it. And I think that all of that led to, this word trust obviously being used within this moment that we're all together repeatedly. It was at its core. That was what it was. And I think that we all walked into it with this very, leveled honesty about what was happening. Never tried to sugarcoat anything when it got rough. Never got so over the top excited about anything when it was what it was, but always staying very grounded and level and knowing that, whatever it is, whether it's bad or good, the next day we get up and we can move this ball forward. And we've embraced the spirit of that. I mean, Brad, is that one way to walk into it?
Yeah. And I think, as I'm listening to you talk, I think the other thing too, from my perspective, Tom, is that as I kind of coming out of a financial business background and discovering the music world because of that, the seat I had at the table, that was all new to me. And so I brought, in some sense, I like to think I brought a fresh perspective.
Sure.
Sometimes, but at the same time too, as I realized that I had to learn some new things. And one of those things that I've learned, and this is probably like everyone's going to go, duh, I mean, it's the most obvious thing. But the truth is, this is a really, really hard business to do well. I mean, what Pete and Chris do is so difficult because they're managing careers of very talented artists. And the truth is, and they can speak to this better than I can, the truth is there are so many people that are extremely talented and they will never see the kind of success that Tyler and Josh have seen. So why is that? Is it because they're more involved or they've worked harder? I don't know, but I do know that you got to do that to make. You got to work hard. You got to get up every morning and decide this is what I'm going to focus on. This is what I'm buying into this. And there is no downtime. And the more you're around other artists, the more you can see, look, I don't know what it is going to make this person or that person succeed, but if they aren't willing to work, if they aren't willing to make their business their number one priority, chances are they're not going to succeed.
Yeah, I remember Tyler when we met him a couple of years ago he came to our office, and I remember saying, "Hey, we'd love for you to talk to all these musicians." And he said, "Well, you're not going to get me to say this is an easy thing, and all of a sudden, you're gonna be famous and successful quick." But it was that work. That was the time he came in, and I had to put a moratorium. I couldn't tell anybody that 21 Pilots were coming into our office building, because they were arguably and still are the most popular, successful band in the world. But I finally realized I had to tell our receptionist, who is an older woman who lives on a farm nearby. I said, I got to tell you, don't tell anybody, but 21 Pilots is going to meet us in the boardroom. And she said to me, "Tom, you can't fit 21 Pilots in that boardroom." I found the one person who hadn't heard of 21 Pilots right there. So let's talk a little bit about the process. Can you describe, and I don't know if this is Pete or Chris, maybe, but any of you, describe kind of their creative process? Is there anything we can learn in the audience here about, how they conceptualize or write or produce? How would you characterize the process kind of simply?
Pete, you want to roll it?
Sure. I mean, every artist obviously is unique to themselves. And with 21 Pilots, it's all coming from the creativity of Tyler. So our job is to just make sure, like I said before, he has the resources that he needs to maximize his creativity and to accomplish whatever creative goals he's setting out for himself. So if that means that, Tyler doesn't want to hop on a plane every time he wants to record, well, let's make it easier for him to record closer to home. So the things that we do as his label partner are all done to really maximize his creativity and his efficiency. But all the creative is 100% driven by him.
So do Tyler and Josh live in Columbus? I think Tyler lives in Columbus, doesn't he?
Yeah, Josh is back and forth. He's in Columbus
California.
quite a bit, and Tyler's full-time Columbus. It was kind of funny the other day. Tyler said to me that it was the first time in years that he's actually been in Columbus because of the pandemic. Been in Columbus and not traveling all over the world, and he came to realize why so many people like to take a few weeks and go to Florida or go find some sunshine. Because he never really, as an adult, had never really worried about that, because for the last 10 years we've been traveling, most either in Australia or Europe or the West Coast or whatever, and he's just always had that as his getaway, and he doesn't have that this year.
Yeah, right. All right, so I have a surprise question for you. This is a rapid fire, real quick. Biggest mistake you've made in this process? I guess I should say less. Who wants to start?
Ooh, who wants to start?
That's a tough one. We haven't made a big mistake, and that it doesn't, I don't say that from the standpoint that, oh, look at us, we're getting it right. Cause we've made plenty of, little mistakes. I think, on our end, we moved through the trend cycle and really bit off the world at a rapid pace. And I think, maybe we would have slowed that down a little bit. We went around the world, and Brad did 140 shows in 14 months. That But but once again, the net negative of that was, lesson learned. We're going to be a little more paced on the next global touring cycle. But by and large, we've believed in our partners, and we believed in us setting the pace. We know ultimately that the decisions that are made come out of these meetings and the consultation and conversations that that Brad and I have with everybody, and then ultimately with Tyler and Josh. And there is no different than there is no one big mistake. I can't sit here and say, and look, we had that one big watershed moment that made the difference and why we're here. It is, this is what it is, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, what's that, Tom?
That's kind of the theme that I am hearing with this band.
Yeah.
Don't let your highs get too high and your lows get too low. There aren't dramatic pieces one way or the other. It's kind of.
Yeah, and this is one of the music industry's great artist development stories and marketplace development stories. I think for some, there's a perception that Stressed Out was this overnight success. And the reality is that, the guys were playing arenas around the world before that became a hit. And, those daily decisions that were made, when it felt like something was a little bit off, we would call the audible and shift gears, and always stayed true to some very defined principles that ultimately center with what it is that is this artistic vision that that Tyler has driven off of his songs, and how that discovery and how at this point a massive global fan base stands behind this band.
Pete, what kind of advice would you give, any career advice you would give to some of the artists who are on the call tonight as they're trying to find their way? What are some of the things that you've learned over your years in your career that you would say to them?
I think that it's all about upping your craft. And, I always say that I hear a lot of good music, in my job, day-to-day listening. I don't hear a lot of great music. There's a big difference between good and great. Great is what's going to help you headline, get you to headline the arena. Good is going to have you playing a Thursday night at the local club and have some fans.
Is there anybody you would suggest talks to this group that maybe isn't on the call yet? Well, hello. How's it going, Tyler?
I'm good. Hey, Chris, Brad, Pete.
Hi, Tyler.
Hey, he's here.
There's just the five of us here,
Awesome.
and then 100 other people.
Amongst ourselves.
How are you, Tyler?
I'm doing well here, and I'm sorry if I interrupted your guys' flow, but I'm here in my studio in Columbus right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just taking a break from working on some new stuff, and got your invite, so I decided to stop by and say hey. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I also appreciate that pizza order you had the other night.
Yeah.
That went well.
Can't get enough, man.
We were just talking about how kind of your rhythm has changed here with this pandemic, and
yeah,
you've probably been sitting in Columbus longer than you have in the last.
Yeah, I mean, probably, I've been touring almost 10 years now, and I was just telling my wife how I finally understand why someone would ever want to go on vacation. I think for 10 years straight, the idea of going on vacation turned my stomach, because all I wanted to do for 10 years was to go home. And so being at home for however many months now straight is probably easily the longest, without good reason. And I don't know.
You're not retiring then, are you? You're not doing anything like that.
I'm not doing what?
You're not doing anything like retiring then, are you?
I might be done. Just don't, well, maybe we'll have another conversation without these other guys on the call.
Yeah, all these other guys.
He's
Yeah.
always wanted to work at Donato. So.
Yeah.
Hey, Tyler, why don't you talk about this team a little bit? What is it about these three that have helped make the band go where it needs to go?
Well, I will say that every time, well, it hasn't been very often because, you know, we don't, I don't know, we haven't gone to a lot of award shows, but anytime that we win an award and there's this idea of like, what do you say on stage? Who do you think? These three guys are on the top of the list. In fact, probably the only ones on the list. And I just never got around to thanking them. I just always either was taking my pants off in front of everyone or saying something semi-jokingly or inspirational or whatever. And so, I mean, I guess that's kind of a quick way of saying how important these three dudes are.
They talk a lot about trust and talk about trust between the artists and the management. And I think that it definitely rings true when we get to know all of you. More and more we get to talk.
Yeah, it's amazing, you know, rubbing shoulders with other artists and other bands that, you know, they don't necessarily have that trust, or that trust has been broken many times in the past for them with other people that they've worked with. And, you know, I talk to them in, you know, I'll try to encourage them, but at the end of the day, I tell them, I don't really know what that's like. I don't know what it means to always have to watch my back and always have to wonder if I'm being slighted.
Mhm.
And it really, that trust that has been built with these guys is why I feel like I can focus on music or focus on having a family or just focus on bettering myself. And a lot of energy and a lot of focus for a lot of artists is watching their own back. And I'm glad I don't have to do that.
Oh, boy, that says a lot. It really does.
Yeah.
So what are you working on? Are you willing to divulge?
I'm thinking about going into real estate.
Got a fixer upper you're interested in?
Yeah,
talking
you know,
about?
I'm just gonna start diving in. No, I'm always writing, always working on some songs. I think that I'm sure that they've addressed it already at this point, but you know, this year for us was a lot of shows, just like any other year. We had a lot of festivals all over the world. We had our first stadium show in Moscow was going to be a little later this year. Really excited about that. And several other tours that we had planned that we didn't even announce. And obviously all that has been put on hold. So rewriting the rest of the year for us has been exciting, but also, I don't know, sometimes frustrating. I think ultimately being able to take out that frustration in a way that I get to write music and hopefully releasing music sooner than we'd thought is the goal and the focus. You know, when we released this song Level of Concern, I don't know, a few weeks ago, something like that.
Mhm.
I remembered how exciting it was to release music. It almost kind of like reawoke something in me that was, oh yeah, this is amazing. This is an amazing feeling to not just write and record, but to actually show someone. You know, even at a young age when I was writing songs, it started out always being for me. You know, it was because I loved doing it and I was working through something personally, and for some reason songwriting and writing lyrics and getting those thoughts out in musical form always helped. But there was nothing like showing your brother that song or showing your parents that song or showing a close friend that song. There's something about watching that creation that happened in a vacuum, getting bounced off of another human and watching it come back at you and getting their response and the reaction that really validated what you were trying to say. And I fell in love with that feeling as well. And that's why releasing music and also playing shows is something that, you know, I will always be in love with because of that back and forth that you get. And right now the show thing is not really a reality. So I'm hoping that it still exists when the dust settles, because I think it's a really, I don't know, there's really nothing like it to go to a live show.
Any sense that this time that you're having right now and the time in the world that we're having will have an effect on your creative product on the other end? Do you see a year from now that there's something different
I mean,
coming?
that's a good question. I think logistically things are changing. I mean, look at you. You figured out Zoom. We all figured it out. I've never had this program. You know, in just on a creative level, though, even Josh and I working remotely, passing files back and forth, we always knew the age of the internet that was possible. But the idea of getting into a room with someone and working on music with them personally was always the ideal. And now being forced, not just geographically, but because of the times, to work remotely, I think that we've tapped into developing a new skill in being able to pass those files back and forth, those ideas back and forth, and something that we might continue to do, or at least have in our back pocket if we need to work that way in the future. So looking for the positive in it, it's, that's a skill that we've learned. Learning new instruments, getting better at the piano, learning how to play guitar, just trying to have the time to focus on getting the drums to hit right. Just little things, trying to take advantage of this time to get better at. Like I said, I hope that live music doesn't go away. I every time I get on a call with these guys, and they'll always say, "Oh, I mean, don't worry, that's ridiculous." But I'm the one that's all, concerned about. Can you even imagine thousands of people getting together right now? It's hard to even imagine. And I hope we don't lose it. So
Yeah. That's been a big part of your career.
Yep. Yes, it is. Might have to give me a part-time job at Donato's.
Yeah, we still have a couple of those delivery jobs open in case you or Josh were ready. So
I'm ready.
I don't want to take too much of your time. I appreciate you.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, guys. And
Anything you want to say to the group? We got a whole bunch of people from Columbus who are musicians and all interested in this whole process.
Similar to I mean, I think it's really cool that people are interested in hearing the story. I know that there's so many layers to it, but no one's story is the same. And that's something that I tried to realize even at a local level when I was just starting. You could see other musicians, other artists, other people in the industry, and you would try to emulate that, either, literally by trying to write the music they were writing, or just trying to get to know the people that they knew. And they had this one song that got in front of this one person who gave you that one chance. And then that's how it lined up where they were able to play music for a living. And I always found that chasing that, putting all your eggs into one basket, it just resulted in a lot of disappointment. Making your own path and realizing that there's no two equations the same, and trying to get to that end goal is really important. I remember Josh and I, there was a specific moment, instead of trying to, reach out to the right person or get in front of the right person, or I don't know, schmooze our way into some party, or getting in front of someone who's going to change our lives, we made a decision to just put our heads down and work, write songs, record songs, play shows anywhere. And I'm glad that we did that. And then several years later, we pop our head out of the ground and realize, wait a second, you kind of look back and see how far you traveled. And I think there's a point in everyone's career, specifically in music, that you have to kind of just go underground and work, not knowing how you compare to the competition, or you don't really even feel yourself passing anyone or being passed. You just are working, and then eventually you pop your head up and you realize how far you've come. So just encourage people to keep doing it. So
That's great advice. That's great direction. And I think a lot of musicians in Columbus, and there is a lot of very hardworking people who are just they care about their craft. And I think you can get distracted, and I think that advice is clearly a message that people need to hear. So
no, I mean, I live here in Columbus. I'm really excited to stay here for as long as I want to be here forever. So I love this city. I love the state, and I'm proud to call it my home. I'm even more proud that there are people who live here who are proud of us. That means a lot to me. So
that's cool. Awesome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'll let you guys get back to talking about how great I am.
All right, Tyler. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Take care.
Hey, Tom, this might be a good time to open up for Q&A.
Great.
Thane, you want to moderate, give us some questions for Tom?
Sure. Our first one comes from Zach Little of St. Seneca. He asks, how has being an artist based in Columbus, rather than a more established music industry city like LA or New York, been a challenge? And how have you managed to overcome these challenges if they were? How has it helped?
Great question.
I guess the short answer on that is that it is no hindrance today, right? You know, in fact, I think there's probably an advantage to not being in Los Angeles or being in New York City or being in London, and understanding how, you know, how to get out on the road and stay focused on making the best music you possibly can and trying to connect with people outside of the industry, right? When it's all said and done, we live in a world today, unlike any other time, where music can get in front of, you know, a potential fan, whether it's in, you know, Perth or Bangor, Maine, or St. Petersburg, Russia. And, you know, there is no wall by which to build a fan base. And there is no requirement that says you need to build that fan base in Los Angeles or Nashville or New York. And I mean, Pete, I think you probably are better served. You know, you travel the world and see artists from all over the place.
Yeah, geography doesn't really matter. I think that what Chris just said, if you're in a bigger city like New York or LA, you're competing with more people just because of the density of those cities. I think that a city like Columbus allows you, you know, it's not a small place, but it's not a gigantic place. And there's definitely a feeling of community because a lot of people there are from there. Chris is from there. Brad is from there. Tyler is from there. You know, you come to New York City, how many people are like, yeah, I'm from here? Or LA, I'm from here. You know, people go there. So I think that there is a, you know, pride and a sense of ownership that comes with, you know, really working hard and paying your dues and ultimately succeeding from a town like Columbus.
Cool. Next question is from Aaron Pitcock. They ask, how has the global fan base of 21 Pilots grown to appreciate Columbus after becoming fans of the band? They might not have known much about the Columbus before loving 21 Pilots, but we've had lots of visitors during the tour to Columbus.
You know, I think that Tyler and Josh, their love for Columbus and kind of what Columbus means has resonated. And, you know, we see it every time we do something big in Columbus. Tour de Columbus probably being one of the best examples of that, where, you know, we pull the zip codes on where people are coming from, and the amount of people who travel for these big events in Columbus, Ohio has been, it's inspiring. It's inspiring to watch the idea of this global community that will come to Columbus, Ohio, and spend the time and the effort and the money to get there in order to be, you know, with their people, if you will, and with this fan base. So I think it's there's that, and then I think it also, you know, it's also just the sense that, you know, be proud of where you're from. You know, it's who you are, and I think that resonates too.
And I would say too, I would add to that one of the practices that I had early on, and as social media was becoming a thing, simultaneously as 21 Pilots was becoming something, I would not allow myself to go to bed that night until I've read everything that somebody was saying, whether it was Facebook or Twitter. I was always just trying to track what's the fan base, or what are the people saying about this band, and what happened was, and you know, we came to see that a lot of the global fan base came to think of Columbus as kind of a place they wanted to visit because it was where Tyler and Josh were from. And I mean, that led to some sketchy things, as you know, as fans would show up on the doorstep. I think that's the house where they filmed Stressed Out, or, you know what I mean? It would be, you definitely would know and would see that fans would come from out of town just to be in Columbus. But I think that globally, Tyler and Josh have been so proud of where they're from that it has become a place that a true 21 Pilots fan would love to come to Columbus and many of them have, as Chris said, would love to come to Columbus to see a show in their hometown because that's the hometown crowd.
All right, our next question is from Consuelo. They ask, they've worked as a manager for a local band and they definitely want to pursue a career in the music industry, but they're not sure if management is right for them. What do you think is the key to realizing if they are or not?
I guess I have to answer that, right? So,
You're up.
I don't know. I think that probably the key to that is, do you wake up every day inspired and do you find yourself working through the tough times with as much energy as you do the good times? And it's tough for me. I mean, I've only worked in the music business since I was a kid, so I don't know anything else. And I think it's I have found. Even though I've had some amazing experiences in my career, management is my home, right? And it took me a minute to get there. It took me 15 years really to get there. So I find inspiration in what I feel the management responsibilities are. But I guess the advice that I would give would be, if you feel that way, then this is that moment in time where you should look at the parts of the business that you have seen or interacted with, whether close or at a distance. And if there's something that you say, wow, that's really interesting, and that makes me really curious, then run towards that. If it's a booking agency or working for a venue, or the idea of working for a record label, or the idea of working in publishing, the idea of the world we live in today, where every significant social platform has a music division. There's more in this industry than there has ever been. And I think maybe that's a moment where you can kind of step back and say, look, if I'm really not finding it here, that's great, right? You're discovering that it's something maybe I don't think I want to do. And then you ask the questions of, well, what are the things that I think are inspiring, and start to move in the direction of those opportunities.
Cool. So next question is from Skylar Harris, and they ask, how do you approach social media strategy? How do you use social media platforms to communicate the 21 Pilots brand?
I have to take that one too, man. Authentically, the guys post everything. There's a strategy that if you were to go back and look through the 21 Pilots Instagram, or the 21 Pilots Twitter feed, or what happened early on Facebook, we're not quite as on Facebook as we were, early on, that you see a very kind of coming back to this word, right? A very authentic position. The feed is not used to clutter with nonsense. It is about articulating what is consistent and aligned with what I think is this idea of the brand and the emotion of 21 Pilots. And I think you see that with every post that, that goes out. And, we stay very consistent with that. At times we have to do the things that we have to do for all of our partners that support the band, and, the digital service providers and our concert promoter partners and all that. So it's also an amazing vehicle by which to communicate what's happening in the moment. But then there's this overarching, if you will, position of messaging that the guys are masterful at, actually, when it comes to staying, exactly on point with what is the vehicle of social media.
All right, next question's an anonymous question. It's why do you think Columbus hasn't developed a music business infrastructure? And do you think the Music Commission could help?
Bruce?
Seems like a Bruce question.
Oh, well, I'm hoping that we can help, and, I think we are. Why it hasn't, I don't know. Sometimes I think that people take music for granted these days, and that we don't have a university that really has a progressive music business program that's interdisciplinary. But I think we're going to. I think that we're going to have young managers, or we like to call them fanagers, and that we can help groom. Last year, there were 5 bands from Columbus signed to labels, several of them to major labels. So I think that's their first steps first. And if we had that infrastructure, I think we'd be in a position to nurture bands, get them to the point where they would be able to be signed or attract a Chris or Brad or Pete. It's, I'm new to Columbus by 2 years, so I don't know that history, but I think we're primed for it.
Yeah. Bruce, I would actually add, being somebody who travels the world and what I do, that Columbus has more of an infrastructure than one might think. Clearly what you guys are doing is a significant statement. The Music and Media Enterprises program at Ohio State that brings, essentially a minor program in the music business to the student body. That's there. Clearly what Promo West is in terms of what's happening there. I think you see, a tremendous amount of support from, even from radio, at WNCI and CD 102.5 that, there's a lot of support for smaller artists. And I think that is, there's a lot more going on in Columbus than what you would realize. Is it Nashville? No. Is it New York? No. Is it Los Angeles? No. But is it Miami? No. But that's that is hopefully what kind of some of the long-term goals are with with what's happening with Music Columbus, and there is more than I think what people realize.
Well, I think we're aware of all that, but I think that maybe the question was more like, where are the record labels? Where are the managers? Where are the agents? And we're really well aware of how fertile radio is. There are radio stations here that even NCI that play local music. You can't find that at an iHeart station anywhere else in the country. But that's what we're hoping to do, to be a catalyst.
Cool. Next question's from Nick Ryanman. They ask, do you think that live shows being on pause will hurt young emerging artists?
I don't know if I could take a stab at that, only just from what I've learned these last few years and from Chris and Pete and the rest of the team. But I don't know if I would say hurt. I would certainly say delay. The live music world is so important, I think, to an artist's career, if that's what they want to be. If they want to be live performers. Songwriters, I don't think so. Producers, probably not as much. I think a lot is happening, at least from what I've heard and seen among other artists, either here in Nashville or just other artists that I know of or I'm aware of, songwriters and so forth. There's a lot happening, but the live music scene is definitely going to put a delay on things. And like Tyler said, I don't know when 1,000 or 10,000 people are going to be of the same mindset, how soon they are going to be interested in gathering together and going to a show. I got to believe it's going to be sooner than later. If you look at the demographic, if you look at the confidence that a lot of young people have, look, I'm going to a show. I've missed live music for a long time. I'm going out there. You'd think that might be the mentality. So hopefully that's going to ease up. But for some young artists that are trying to build a business, build a brand, build their image on live music, it certainly has been a challenging time. But then again, with a challenging time, you look for opportunities, look for different ways to rise above it. And again, the creative hard workers are the ones who are going to rise to the top.
It's definitely going to force artists and musicians and songwriters and creative people to be more creative, to figure out ways that they can get their music to reach people and to touch people in a time where live shows just physically can't right now.
Okay, next question comes from Andy. They ask, are there any local initiatives or programs, music and art related, that the band or team feels strongly about supporting? If so, what are they and how can others become involved?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, Brad, I think, you might also have a thought on this. We're very involved right now in what has been a global effort with Crew Nation and raising money for what is happening there and the challenges that obviously, emerged out of nowhere. And that's been a tremendous amount of our focus. And there's some other initiatives that the guys do. One in Columbus in particular that they're behind with with basketball, and we're very involved with Make a Wish on the road. And I think it's one of those things where that's where it is in the here and now, right? And those are things that have resonated with the guys. And and I think that we want to be very focused on what that is. But the guys listen to lots of music from bands and are very on point with what's happening in Columbus, and very much a part of being being a band that brings the idea of Columbus back to back to the industry and back to Columbus. So it's that part's been vitally important.
Cool. All right,
Let's
next
take a
question.
few more, Thane, instead of, we're going to wear our speakers out if we keep going.
Understood.
Take a few more.
All right, so we got one from DJ Wolf. They asked, what kind of work went into making that first sold out Newport show happen? And what was Promo West's involvement?
I mean, I can answer from my recollection of those early shows. That one in particular, and Tyler has shared this strategy, I think, with others. But we were at a point where we had done a lot of shows around the state, but the promotion of those smaller shows really wasn't top of mind for him. Wanting to see what could we do in Toledo, what could we do in Lima, what could we do in Dayton or Cincinnati, Cleveland, Akron, and as those shows happened over the course of time, and the band kind of built a name for itself. We had done several shows. I remember one show we did at Newport. We were one of 11 bands, and I think we were number 7 or 8. I mean, it was the headliners were a group of guys, again, high school kids that weren't necessarily any better. They had just been doing it longer. And we finally got to a point where I thought, why don't we take this risk? We had talked to the folks at Promo West and said, look, let's take the risk and let's rent out the what would it cost us to rent out the Newport and do our own show? We'll bring in 3 or 4 other bands, but we'll be the headliner. We'll set this up. And as Chris recalled, that was kind of the launching point when we put that out there. And I remember going to the venue that afternoon, not knowing what was happening. And one of my sons, who was close friends with Tyler and was working with the band at the time, he called me and said, I think we sold out. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, I think we sold 1,400 tickets. And I said, no way, there's no way that happened. And lo and behold, that had happened, and they opened the balcony at the Newport. And so I think that show sold 1,700 tickets. And Promo West was thrilled, and that really did begin the onslaught of phone calls. And I remember at the time, I've often told Tyler, if I ever wrote a book about this experience, the title is going to be The Only Adult in the Room. Because I was getting all those phone calls and emails. And I remember calling Chris before we had officially hired Chris, and he was, rightfully kind of staying available, but he wasn't officially the manager yet. I remember calling Chris saying, Chris, so-and-so just called. Who's that? And Chris would be like, okay, he was over here and then he went there and this is what he does. And don't worry about talking to them. And so we were just fielding calls left and right. But that's when I first discovered that local bands, no matter what city you're in, are not selling 1,700 tickets typically in their own market. So that was the event that kind of made the whole thing just snowball and led to the 13 labels and the coast to coast meetings and all that. It was a crazy time, but Promo West, it was great because, you know, Chris started out there and they've been tremendous Columbus-based partners for our shows in Columbus ever. So it's been good.
Cool. We got one last question. Sarah asks, do you think the 21 Pilots have altered the Columbus music scene?
You know, I mean, yes. I mean, on one hand, but you know, I think that you look at the fact that you know, Tyler and Josh coming from Columbus, that, and now the global success story of what this is. You know, this is something that is rooted in Columbus. Kind of the conversation going back to what does Columbus mean to the guys, and I think that is at its core, right? That is, you know, that has been something that wherever we go, it comes back to Columbus, Ohio. Tyler, you know, as he said when he was on the phone or on the call with us, that, you know, he wants to spend the rest of his life in Columbus, Ohio. So, you know, from that end, this has been very much about wanting to, you know, celebrate Columbus and bring eyes and ears into Columbus, and you know, letting people know that, hey, this little band that started Brad playing shows for, you know, 10 people. You know, today plays shows for 44,000 in Mexico City, right? And you know, and that's I guess that would be an altering if there is such a thing. That, you know, this is you know, this is this idea of the power of the local dreamer. You know, this is the idea that Tyler closes every show with, that, you know, we are 21 Pilots and so are you. You know, that is all about Columbus, Ohio, and you know, and they carry that out into the world, and I think that comes back into Columbus, and you know, Columbus, to Tyler's point, Columbus is very proud to, you know, to call them their own, and I think that on that level, absolutely, that has altered the local music scene, and will forever. It's a, you know, it's been an amazing journey.
I want to thank our navigator, Tom, Chris, Brad, and Pete. Thanks very much for participating. Tell Tyler I said thank you as well. And to our audience, thanks for supporting Columbus and the Music Commission and our scene here in Columbus. So good night, everybody. Take care.
See you guys. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.